Welcome back, everyone. It's time for another spoiler cast. So, if you have not read the Watchmen comic book, or at least watched the Zack Snyder film, we're going to be talking about both today. I think we're going to talk about the comic book first, and then at the end, we'll talk about the film. But before that, I have my cohorts, Boken and Acer. Boken, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, I guess. It's
Okay, you guess. Fine. Okay.
Kind of dirty out there.
Yes, I've been afraid
epidemic
to leave
out
my
there.
home. Yes. Sad. Acer, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I don't like that.
We didn't need that. We didn't need to hear you slurping that like whatever it is.
It's water. I'm having my water cup
Might have
here.
also been a vape. I don't know.
Man, for all I know, it could have been sludge. I don't know.
I'm drinking my Icelandic sludge. I just want everybody to know that Watchmen is brought to you by me. I chose to watch this.
Yes.
I
You
could've-
are, in this case, the Watchman.
What? I feel like
Because he
that
brought us
makes
the
no
Watchmen.
sense if I'm gonna think about it more, but I don't want to.
I'm just saying because people said that I have bad tastes for liking Code Geass. I also like Watchmen.
And in your defense, Watchmen was pretty great.
Yes. It was.
Yes. So I was actually very curious. So are you like big into comic books in general, or did you just like read Watchmen specifically because you were interested in it, or like I want a little bit more backstory here?
I'm not big into comic books right now because they kind of suck right now. But I like all the sort of conventional superhero comics. My knowledge of them dithered away when I left my teens because the books got worse and because they kept just rebooting all the universes. But yeah, I like them all. I've read almost every... Like, if you think of a great comic book, I've read it. If you think of, like, a good comic book of the last 10 years, I'll read that. Like, when Court of Owls came out, I went back in and I read that. And I keep up to date with specific creators.
Okay. Have you read other works by Alan Moore? Are there any other ones by him that you'd recommend?
I've read almost all of them. All the notable ones, at least. Yeah, Marvel Man is one of the best just comic books ever. It's basically... did you guys see Shazam?
No.
But you get that character, right? He's the kid, he shouts Shazam, and then he becomes like Captain Marvel, or Shazam now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Marvel Man was the first of the really sort of, what if superheroes were real? And it's, Marvel Man originally was a ripoff of Captain Marvel, who is now Shazam. And
Wait, but there's also Captain Marvel.
in Marvel, yeah, it's a long, complicated legal battle that involves corporations. DC sued Fawcett Comics because Captain Marvel was a ripoff of Superman, which he really wasn't. But they won.
Speaking of Superman, real quick, someone recommended me a Superman comic by Alan Moore called "Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow." Have you read that one?
Mm-hmm.
Is that one good?
So I'll circle back around to it in a minute.
Okay, sure.
Back on Marvel Man. The Marvel Man was created as a ripoff of Captain Marvel, the Fawcett character who's now Shazam. And he's just, it's the exact same, except he's blonde, he wears a blue suit, and he's called Marvel Man. And Alan Moore was given the reins to write that character, early 80s, I believe. And in his world, he has the man who becomes Marvel Man, whose name I forget. He wakes up one day and he has this vivid memory of being Marvel Man, sort of. But he had forgotten it. And then he, shouts the word Kitoma, which is atomic backwards, and then he becomes Marvel Man again. And he just realizes, oh my god, I was this incredible hero, and there was like this the world was like the golden age of comic books, and then he starts thinking like, why did it stop? Like why did I stop being a Marvel Man? And it had to do with this sort of mystery that they created, set up early on in the comic, about a supervillain whose plan actually worked. And Alan Moore didn't finish the story, so there's not a lot of details I can get into. But Neil Gaiman continued it a bit, and I think he's going to return to it one day. There's this kind of a legal battle over the character last time I checked. But Marvel Man, great comic run by Alan Moore. Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow? This is sort of the thing about Alan Moore in superhero comics, is that he likes to, his stories are about superhero comics. So Marvel Man, it's sort of a, let's digest Captain Marvel or Marvel Man in a real setting. Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, that's sort of a distilling of the golden era, Silver Age Superman, who like threw planets around and had all these crazy adventures. If I wouldn't recommend reading it unless you have an affinity for that. But if you just want to read a good Superman story, you should probably read something like All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison. But if you can, because Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow and a lot of Alan Moore's work, it's sort of thick within layers of what is a comic book, what is a superhero comic book. So I don't know how much you would be able to get out of Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
I hear you. I'm still interested in reading it. I already bought it, so
yeah. Well,
whatever.
If you already bought it, then just read it.
Yeah. He also recommended For the Man Who Has Everything.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
The problem was it's not on Kindle. That's how I read these comic books, because I imagine finding the literal paperbacks would be difficult, so I'm just getting them through Kindle. Fortunately, it's not on Kindle.
They have most of these comic books on Comixology.com, so you can just go there and buy it for probably like $2. Alternatively, you can...
What's Comixology? Is that like...
That's just like Netflix for comic books. Okay. It's not a subscription model. It's just you have an account and you buy comic books there.
And you download like the PDF or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. All right. I'll consider that.
Can I just say that every single Alan Moore title seems to have man in the title for some reason? Watchmen? What Happened to the Man of Tomorrow?
V for Vendetta does not have men in it.
Okay. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
What do you mean? V for Mandetta. From Hell.
The Killing Joke does not have men in it.
No, well, yeah, Batman, The Killing Joke.
Oh.
Well, okay, fine, I guess.
The Killing Joke Man.
He can't help that. He can't help that.
No. So, anyway, yeah, Alan Moore, very prolific. He's done a lot of great stuff. He sort of peaked in the 80s with, like, Swamp Thing, with, I think, Marvel Man. I think he's very underrated of his works. V for Vendetta. Maybe we'll do a V for Vendetta episode once, because I have a lot to say about that story.
I'm very interested in V for Vendetta, because I remember watching the film and feeling very mixed about it, like... And I'm assuming the comic book is way better than the movie.
Yes. Although there are some changes which I think are warranted.
This is not a V for Vendetta episode, by the way.
No, it's not.
No.
But for V for Vendetta, the big difference between V for Vendetta and all his other works is that I think V for Vendetta was the only time he in earnest tried to justify the superhero. Whereas everywhere else, he's sort of like tearing down the idea of a superhero. With V for Vendetta, it seems like he genuinely wanted to create a superhero who is righteous in the world he lives in. But we'll maybe save that for a later episode.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So maybe we'll do that some other time.
Yes.
But the last question I have before we get into the discussion proper is, why Watchmen? Why did you recommend Watchmen?
Because I read it a lot and I didn't know I didn't have anything else to pick. You guys pushed me.
Okay, fair enough. So, yeah, I loved Watchmen. I've actually started rereading it because I liked it so much. And I want to thank you for recommending it because I probably wouldn't have read it otherwise because I'm just not really big into comic books. But this really impressed me, and it actually has inspired me and be like, okay, I should read more comic books because Watchmen was it was of such high quality in ways I didn't expect that it made me want, like, okay, now I'm going to read The Killing Joke. Now I want to read, the Superman comic book we talked about. Now I want to read V for Vendetta. So
I
appreciate it.
I would say that quality-wise, the closest you're going to get to Watchmen is Marvel Man. I think you'll be able to dive right in. I don't know. I have a general question for both of you. How much of the distilling of the American superhero comic book of Watchmen, how much of that did registered for you? Because I was very familiar with superhero tropes and how this sort of universe usually works when I first read it. I'm wondering, you guys you're not as much into superheroes as me, I would imagine.
So,
yeah.
No, I would say that my knowledge of superheroes comes down to like cartoons and some of the movies, and that's about it. I read like a couple of Spider-Man comic books when I was a kid. Like my dad, when he would go to like the drugstore, he would occasionally come back with a random comic book, and some of them happened to be like Spider-Man comic books, and that's about it.
That would be in the 90s, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
I remember one time.
So you were probably in the whole Clone Saga debacle.
I don't even remember. I remember he got me a Batman comic book once. I vaguely remember it. The only thing I remember, like, the Joker had some like two random floozies with him, and they got their shit kicked in by Batman for some reason, like, which in retrospect, Batman beating up these women sounds really fucking weird.
That sounds really apt for 90s Batman.
But yeah, so I I saw it more about, like, because even the comedian brought it up. The Night Owl and the comedian brought it up of like, oh, what happened to the American dream? And comedian's like, it came true. Like I saw it more from that angle than rather than like the American superhero specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never read a comic book like in my life. But I still feel like they're part of most of my life for some reason, which is because of the TV shows.
Oh yeah, the Marvel shows, Daredevil and
yes,
Punisher.
Well, that too, but even in the 90s, like Spider-Man, Batman,
X-Men,
Batman Forever, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
All that shit I watched fairly religiously. And then I really liked the X-Men movies, like 1 and 2 especially. I watched all of them.
I saw 1. I never saw 2, and I saw 3. I remember 3 being terrible.
3 was pretty bad. Yeah.
2 I think it's the second best X-Men movie after First Class, unless you count Logan 2, which is maybe a competitor for
by far
first
the
spot.
best.
See, I don't quite agree. I think First Class edges out Logan.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But
I have
okay.
I have a
Logan
lot of affinity for that weird 60s camp superheroics.
Well, but Logan is very. I feel like I'm in tune enough with comic book with superhero comics that I can appreciate something like Logan for being so drastically different from all the normal stuff, And that's mostly because I watched all the movies. I watched all of the Netflix shows. I watched the TV shows when I was a child. yeah, so that. And I watched the Watchmen movie back when I really started getting into movies, and I liked it back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did as well. I saw the Watchmen movie.
We'll save the Watchmen movie talk for later.
Yeah,
First, I'm wondering, should we maybe do a quick recap of what the story is, or do we want to continue just sort of aimlessly talking about Watchmen?
And we can give a recap.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Give a recap.
Me?
What, me?
Either of you.
Oh, shit.
I mean, it makes more sense for
I'm not
Acer.
prepared for this.
I think Acer's more
feel like
familiar with it.
Yeah, but Acer has... I feel like it should be a challenge. I just don't want to take the challenge.
I'll do it. It starts out with the comedian being murdered. The comedian was a superhero back in the day. It's basically Alan Moore was. Well, actually, I'll talk a bit about the backstory first. Alan Moore wanted to use. DC acquired a lot of Charleston characters from Charleston Comics back in the day. Alan Moore wanted to tell a story with those characters, and DC said, "No thanks, because you're going to kill them and make them horrible rapists, and we don't want that." So what he did was he just based his characters off them. So the Question becomes Rorschach, the Thunderbolt becomes Ozymandias, Peacekeeper becomes Comedian, Captain Atom becomes Dr. Manhattan, and he basically creates, it's sort of a murder mystery, and it's sort of an examination of the comedian's life and death. It starts out with him being killed, and it's just this sort of mystery that takes us through through a heightened reality of the late 80s in the Cold War, except you also inject into that the presence of superheroes in America, specifically, though, Dr. Manhattan.
You say heightened reality. I think it's more specific. It is a heightened reality, but I think it's also like an alternate history.
Yeah. Heightened reality. That's not the word I probably should have used. I would say a more escalated reality. Well,
it is heightened in a sense because Dr. Manhattan exists.
Yeah, and you have
and
psychics
also
and stuff.
the superheroes have they're unrealistically strong.
Yeah.
Even though they're not particularly strong for superheroes.
Yeah, and but it is the political climate of the Cold War is really escalated in this world, and the attitude of the comic all the way through is that this is sort of the countdown to Armageddon. And the characters we follow are all former and currently active superheroes who are finding that their simplistic superhero morals aren't good enough to save the world. Because in spite of Dr. Manhattan's incredible powers, can he stop every single nuke? Probably not.
Does he want to stop every
Does he
single
want to stop every nuke?
He doesn't seem to even care.
Yeah, he's slowly losing his humanity because he's basically God. But and it's basically a whodunit that follows these superheroes in the real world in the final days until the apocalypse, so to speak. And
which is nuclear war.
Which is nuclear war. And threaded throughout all of that, it's told around the life and death of the comedian, and it's also it's a really dense story because it's also a complete what's the word here? Breakdown of no, not breakdown. People use the word a lot. I know
what word you're looking for.
Breakdown of what that specific era of superhero comics, where the Comics Code Authority had kind of been gotten away with at that point. People weren't abiding by it anymore, and superhero comics were starting to be made for adults. And like I said earlier with Alan Moore, he likes to sort of tear down the superheroes, and this is the sort of the pinnacle of that.
I would also say an important detail is that nuclear war is more of a threat in this specifically because of Dr. Manhattan, in that he was like a nuclear deterrent of sorts, but then the moment he decided to fuck off to Mars is what really kickstarted the nuclear threat, and that's where a lot of I feel like the tension of the plot comes from, where with Dr. Manhattan gone, the Russians feel like, okay, now we can take over, we could like start war with America.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, do you say nuclear on purpose, or
no?
Okay, because it's just Americanness.
Is there a problem with me saying nuclear?
Yes, you didn't say nuclear before.
What do you mean?
You said it like Homer Simpson. And I thought you're fucking messing with me.
I did?
Yes.
It wasn't intentional.
Like 3 times in a row.
How did I... Wait, all I said was nuclear.
No, you said nuclear.
No, I didn't.
Yes.
I'm
I
editing
didn't say
this.
nuclear.
I'm editing this episode. I'll be the final judge.
Anyway, move on.
Yeah, but speaking of Homer Simpson, Richard Nixon is the president in Watchmen. It's his 3rd term. Because Henry Kissinger is also in the comic, and he dropped his glasses in the toilet in The Simpsons. So yeah, and every one of our main characters is a sort of isolated little example of the inadequacies of superheroics. So with Rorschach, you get a guy who's kind of like, what if Batman was a real guy? Well, probably he would be very antisocial. Probably he would be not very cleanly. His brand of justice really is not adequate for solving any problem, and he's like, Rorschach is practically he is just pretty much a fascist. Like, he reads the New Frontiersman, which is in universe this really fringe, far right-wing newspaper which only lunatics buy.
Ultra conservative.
Yeah, I would even say more than just conservatism. It is.
No, yeah, it's much. It goes way far righter than just that. Yeah, you're right.
And that's sort of. I think every superhero, at least when Alan Moore discusses them, I don't know. Nah, you know what? Let's not. I was gonna go into like the politics of superheroics, but I'm gonna edit that out. Where with Night Owl, you have this character who's impotent, he's fat, he's out of the game, but he still somewhat believes in it. He visits Hollis Mason, the original Night Owl, and he hears these stories. But then
I feel like Night Owl especially, he kind of represents like the goodness, the good that comic books and escapism can give us. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with enjoying comic books, like, because I think Alan Moore might have felt a little self-conscious tearing down like superheroes so much, so he added in Night Owl as kind of a way of saying, hey, look, you know, I'm being critical, but at the same time, at the end of the day, you are reading a comic book.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Comic books are good, and superheroes can be good, and, you know, there's nothing wrong with escapism. It makes us feel good, you know, as evidenced by like his relationship with Laurie. You know, it's a positive relationship, and there, you know, there's nothing wrong with also feeling insecurity and using escapism to help you feel better about yourself.
Yes. And there's even a line spoken by him in the comic where he basically says that, you know, why did you do it? I think Laurie asks him, and he basically says, well, everyone else was doing it, and I had some money, so I decided to do it. So how much? And then you also have a character like the comedian, who's basically like this incredible nihilist, who doesn't really believe in anything he says. But then when he becomes aware of Ozymandias' plan, that sort of facade of nihilism is ripped off of him, and he finds himself unable to cope with what exactly is going on. And that brings us
and he breaks down in front of Moloch, who was one of his former enemies.
Yes, and that's also another interesting thing where these people don't have healthy relationships. They only associate with other former vigilantes, and crazy sociopaths and their former villains. But
Yeah.
but going back to Ozymandias' plan, Ozymandias is my favorite of the American comic book characters because, and I think this is such a masterstroke, when he's introduced as his introduction shows him as the only character who's really above it all. Where you have a character like Rorschach who's on the street just beating up criminals. Ozymandias is talking about, like, this is inadequate. You don't solve any problem by just beating up criminals. You still have wars, you still have famines. What you need to solve are the underlying problems. The Cold War is not going to be de-escalated with superheroes. You're going to need to solve, like, the energy crisis. You're going to need to solve the problems of the world to ease tensions. But then
you don't solve all of the world's problems by, punching people in the face.
Yes, but then
you need to go to the root.
Yeah, but then in the end it's revealed that that's the facade. In reality, he is the most deluded character in the entire story, where the energy, all his experimentations with the energy crisis, eugenics, all of this stuff, he's just he is so deluded that he is a Silver Age supervillain. Like, his plot to trick the world into peace, that's from the back issue of, like, a Superman comic book from the 1960s. Like, it is that stupid, but he is so deluded by his superheroism that he actually thinks that's a good idea. And
okay, that's an interesting take, because I didn't feel like the comic was making fun of the idea at the end.
No, the comic is sort of the entire through line of the comic is this sort of, like, let's see how little these characters are able to solve their problems. And then at the end, you have Rorschach's journal, which is, like, I'm going to unveil it because I am righteous. Whether or not you agree with it, it is not, is it, whether or not, like, he's not willing to lie to protect White's peace. But maybe he should. Like, that's the point where his superhero righteousness is a failure. Like, he's too righteous, in a sense.
Yeah, but you just called Ozymandias' plan stupid, and that implies for me that it could never work, but I feel like the comic displays it in a way where it could end up working. I mean...
stupid, I should say, well, it could never work.
It is incredibly immoral.
Yeah, but it is also just a stupid plan. This was never, like, whatever piece he creates...
It is the most un-superhero thing to do.
Maybe we should introduce what the actual plan is for the people who don't know.
Oh.
Well, it's such a complicated plan. I'll take over duties if you're tired of explaining.
You can take over. This shouldn't just be me.
Yeah, so the plan is essentially that Ozymandias teleports a giant squid to New York. If you've only seen the movie, you're probably a little confused right about now because the movie's ending is completely different. But throughout the film, throughout the comic book, there had been, like, hints and little things strewn about showing the Ozymandias' plans and what he has been doing throughout the story. And what he had been doing was, through eugenics, he had created this giant squid, and he was also developing like the technology for teleportation. So his idea was that he would teleport this giant squid, to New York, which would, it would immediately die because that's the nature of the teleportation, where, like, whatever gets sent, just, like, it can't handle it, even this giant squid, and it would just die. And he made this squid, it's not just like a regular squid, it's like this deformed alien squid, because the intent is that, one, it's teleportation, right? And two, it's this foreign looking creature. He wanted to make it seem like it was an alien invasion.
And also the shockwave of the teleportation itself kills, like, 3 million people or something?
Yes, the teleportation itself also kills, like, most of New York. And
I should also note, though, that just briefly interjecting, he created the brain of the creature by cloning the brains of human psychics, and he implanted into the brain imagery and narratives written by artists of like hell and horror, like as evil thoughts as possible, which was he got them to write them, I believe, under the guise of producing a movie. And he imprinted that, and when the creature is teleported and dies, that those mental images are sent as a psychic shockwave around the world, and millions of people are affected by that.
I believe that stuff was actually written by the writer of the Black Freighter.
Yes.
So yeah, the Black Freighter is a comic book within the comic book about this pirate, which we'll get into that later.
Yes.
But the idea is by teleporting the squid, it's supposed to make it seem like it was an alien invasion, so that the whole world would just stop what they're doing and come together, so that because everything is, the idea would be like, why are we fighting each other when the threat of alien invasion is just right there? And it ends up working.
Which I'm still hung up on Acer calling it a stupid plan.
It's a stupid plan. In the end, before Dr. Manhattan leaves, he tells Adrian that, Adrian asks him whether he did the right thing in the end, and Dr. Manhattan says, well, nothing ever ends, Adrian.
Yeah, that is true.
Yes, I thought that was a great line.
Human tensions are going to be... You may have put a lid on it, but tensions are going to brew again. You haven't really solved anything, and the underlying issues that created the Cold War, they haven't been removed. You've just injected mass murder into it, but nothing has been solved by this. You've just delayed things. And you spoke earlier, I wonder, is that enough? Does that explain why I called it stupid?
Yes, well, in that case, I also agree that this probably won't last. One of the things that I don't have many criticisms of the Watchmen comic, but one of them was that at the end, I feel like everything comes around too quickly to Wade's plan. Like both Night Owl and what is Laurie's name? Well, Laurie
Silk
anyway.
Spectre.
Silk Spectre. They both pretty much immediately agree with him. They have no real qualms. And then you see on the television screens that immediately after the attack of the squid, they go, well, immediately like the Russia and the US have laid down all hostilities and they're now meeting and peace. That's not how quickly stuff would work. I get that they would want to speed it up a little for the comic to be able to end. But
I get what you're saying.
I feel like it would be stronger. Expedient. It would be stronger if the end was, okay, the president of the United States and the president of Russia have agreed to have an emergency
General
meeting.
Secretary of Russia.
Whatever.
Sure.
They agree to have a meeting.
I get what you're saying. I think it's a bit of a nitpick, but no, I do agree with what you're saying to an extent. My bigger issue with the ending was Dan and Laurie banging right afterwards. I was like, why? that felt so unnecessary. Like, I don't want to get into talking about the movie too much just yet, but that was one change where I was like, yeah, okay, you made the right call, Zach. There was no need to have Dan and Laurie just start like banging like right afterwards. Like, I kind of get it in a sense of like Laurie was emotionally distraught and she wanted to feel like this human connection that she has with Dan, and she needed it, just to feel like, because Dan was trying to ask her like, oh, do you think John is okay with the two of us? She's like, that shit doesn't matter right now, we're alive, that's the important thing right now, and I want you to love me, and I get all that. But leave the shagging for another time, ladies and gentlemen. Come on. Yeah. Control yourselves.
Alan Moore
I thought that was slightly inappropriate.
Alan Moore has a lot of sex in all of his comic books. There's a very graphic birth sequence, for example, in Marvel Man.
Okay.
You can look forward to that. with how quickly.
But I hope you get where I'm saying, though.
Yeah. I think it doesn't really bother me, but I get it. With how quickly the world comes around. See, I think you could read that as these both actors, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, they were like a phone call away, because neither one of, like, they were looking for any excuse at that point to just de-escalate all tensions, because it's like 2 minutes until midnight or whatever. So I guess you could look at it and say, well, they both had plans in place to just immediately fold all their hostilities.
And that was the excuse that they needed. Like, I get that too. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, political decisions just aren't made that fast.
No.
You know? More people have to be involved. And I always, at that point, I always think to the ending of Moon, of the movie Moon. I don't know if you've seen that.
With Sam Rockwell. Yeah.
Where, spoilers for Moon, but I'm not going to spoil what the end, like what happens at the end, but basically it ends with not with something actually happening, not the character really achieving anything, but it's like you hear like a newscaster or something go, oh, someone brought up this allegation. And you can, it's a widespread allegation, and you can kind of imagine, okay, it's going to take on steam from there and change things in the future, but the movie doesn't show that. The movie just starts, the first pebble rolling.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys would agree with me on this, but I feel like with Watchmen, the plot, I'm not going to say it's a simple plot, but I wouldn't say the plot is especially complicated, but the story is, if you get what I'm saying. Yeah. Where like,
I don't know.
Like, cause I feel like it's a whodunit for the comedian, and then it unravels like the greater plot of Adrian Veidt. But the story, like the details in between, points A and B are extremely dense.
Yes.
And I feel like that's more than the plot, which I feel like is almost secondary.
I don't know. I feel like it's more not just a whodunit. I mean, it's on the background of Dr. Manhattan leaving Earth, political tensions rising,
Sure.
Like it has more plot points than just the whodunit, and even that has a bunch of twists with Moloch and them finding out about pyramid industries or whatever it was called, all that stuff. But the law is incredibly heavy.
I'm not saying that it's just a whodunit, obviously. And again, I'm not saying it's a simplistic plot. What I'm trying to say is that the plot, I don't think, is as important as the details, that encompass it. Whereas, like, I feel like even something like the relationship between the guy at the newsstand and the two Bernies, right? Like, Bernard and Bernie, like, they don't really have...
Oh, it's important that we both are called Bernie. No, it isn't. Shut the fuck up, Cracker.
But they don't have, like, a lot of significance to the plot, per se, but they add so much texture and detail and depth to the story and to like our understanding of the world, and even some of the characters, like, because that newsstand guy, was constantly selling the New Frontiersman to Rorschach, and then when he finds out like that was Rorschach, that colors his perception, and the way that he interacts with the characters after that. Like, he'll be like, oh yeah, Rorschach used to come and I always kind of knew, but I didn't say, like, he was bullshitting. But like, it's
he didn't know.
But it's details like that really make the world feel alive.
Yeah.
And I think that also allowed Alan to convey some interesting things. Yeah. So like that moment where the two of them realize that they have the same name. I actually took that more as like a commentary on storytelling, where in stories we feel as if like if the author is explaining something to us, if they're revealing something to us, then that means that must have some significance. But that's not always the case, and that's not really how real life works, right? Like, just because you have two people that have the same name, that may mean something in a story, but that doesn't mean anything in reality.
Hmm.
So when the older Bernie's the newsstand guy, he's like, "Oh man, that's so great," and the younger one's like, "No, it's not. It does whatever. People just have the same name." I feel like that was Alan Moore almost making a commentary on like storytelling in general, of like how stories can give significance to things that normally wouldn't.
Yeah, I always read that more though as these are all characters who are just desperately trying to have any sort of normal human interactions. Like you see right before the squid arrives. The bomb. I was watching the movie yesterday. The squid arrives. You have Joe, and what's her girlfriend's name? Stephanie. Like
yeah,
they're like they. She's trying to give her like this book about relationships, but she doesn't want a book about relationships. She just wants to have sex with her. It's all these characters who are and it's even like escalated with the U.S. and the Soviet Union, where it's all these agents who are just unable to really communicate with each other because they're so bad at it. And then the squid arrives and it fixes it, but not really.
I also really appreciated like at that very end when the squid appears and the two Bernies get vaporized, that they hugged each other at the very end, because like that was like their last moments. And like even though they didn't really have much of I guess even calling it a relationship would be a bit of a stretch, but like they did have a human connection with each
Yes.
other. Like the younger Bernie was always there. He didn't really talk to the older Bernie, but just the fact that he was always there, they had something.
Yeah.
Like
And
and
they and it's the same as with the U.S. and the Soviet Union. It seems like these characters, they were just waiting for any excuse to just drop all their facade and just reach out for a human contact.
yeah. And I think that that also makes their death like really impactful. Like these are again, like I said before, these are two characters that don't really have any significance to the plot. Like if you're looking at an extremely pragmatic level, like you could have taken out the two Bernies and
Like the
nothing
movie did?
of yes, and
They're
nothing
in
of
the-
consequence
They're in the
would have
ultimate cut, I believe.
a little bit. But like what I'm saying is like you could have taken them out, and nothing of real consequence would be lost in the grander scheme of the plot. But it adds so much to the story to have their characters there.
Yes.
And again, I don't want to talk too much about the movie. We'll get to it. But like Zach left in the scene of the two of them hugging before they died, but that scene has zero meaning to the audience because they were completely ripped out of the film. While in the comic book, I felt so bad for them at the end. Like I felt so much for these characters, and to see them like at the very end, it really hurt me. Like it was such a bummer.
Yeah, Watchmen has a lot of personality in the characters and in the world. That is because there are so many details, and I think a lot of it also comes from these. What is the book the
Tales
the
of
autobiography
Black...
of
Under the Hood.
Under the Hood?
Yeah.
It
Oh,
comes
I
from,
loved Under the Hood.
I think it is pacing. The Under the Hood segments are a pacing nightmare for me. But I didn't read all of them, but what I read of them, I really appreciated. Which again, not going too much into the movie, but the movie starts out with a lot of the scenes described in Under the Hood shown.
I thought that was
without
cool.
comment.
I thought that was
These
cool.
scenes would mean nothing to you if you haven't read the comics. They mean nothing. In the comic, they're so important to show how human these early superheroes were. Sometimes, their political connections they had, the backstories they had, and all that, where they came from, their backgrounds, why they ended up being superheroes. All that stuff is described in the comics. They only mean something to you in the movie because you realize that scene. You know about that scene already.
Yes. In the I want to say in the comic book's defense, somewhat, because you say it's a pacing nightmare. originally the Watchmen comic book was not sold as like one complete set. It was sold as like individual comics. So like I feel like if you were reading it as they were coming out, then the pacing wise it probably made more sense. Cuz like I think those were placed at the very end of each individual comic book. And then you would have to wait until the next one came out.
And you would also reread each individual issue with that section of the book in mind, and they would give you a bit of a light on certain events in that issue. So it rewarded repeat readings.
Yes, I understand that like pacing wise, if you're like the way that we read it, reading it as one complete experience, it does feel like a huge roadblock of like, well, here's this fucking novel, right before the next chapter. But if you're seeing it like as it was coming out, this was all like, you just finished, you're at the end of the book, and then you have this extra bit at the end that you get to read before, however long it took for the next comic book to come out in the series.
Kind of short-sighted though. I mean, comic books are also collector's items.
They weren't back then.
People...
Well, I thought you meant like books, collected books. No, but the idea back then was that these were just going to be printed once, and then they would, as soon as they quit printing them, Alan Moore gets the rights back, and maybe they'll do something else with it.
Okay.
They didn't have back then. It wasn't the idea that you just have 12 issues in a single book.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, people want to have all those comics. I mean, you don't just get Watchmen episode 3 as a comic book and then leave it at that.
No, that's true.
Obviously. So you kind of have to keep in mind that people want to return to that story, that maybe they miss a few episodes or chapters or whatever it's called. Issues. And that they're going to read through them one after the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering, I want to talk a bit about the Black Freighter. Do we have anything else we want to talk about the comic before we talk about the movie?
Yeah, well, I feel... As I said,
I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, as I said, there's so much personality that I really appreciated. I appreciate also how different the heroes are, both in terms of visuals as well as like their powers, quote unquote, or their specializations. Ability, yeah. Like, Dr. Manhattan is obviously a god. The Dan Night Owl is the tech guy, right? Yeah. Rorschach is the investigator guy who stalks around at night. Veidt is the incredibly intelligent guy.
I would say Dr. Manhattan is Superman. Night Owl is Batman. Rorschach is the Punisher. I'm not sure who I would compare Veidt to.
It's Veidt. You guys both say Veidt. It's Veidt.
Well, in the movie, wasn't it pronounced Veidt in the movie?
No.
Okay, I'm whatever. I'm sorry.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, you just watched it, I guess.
Yeah. But
I'm pronouncing it the American way, and that's the correct way.
I'll just call him Ozymandias. Who would you compare him to then?
Well, he's based on the Thunderbolt, but
I guess there's not a direct comparison.
Maybe like a Mr. Fantastic or somebody, but even then it's
Professor X?
No.
Well, I don't know about that.
Maybe like the closest
Magneto, I guess. Well, not really.
No, the closest I would say would be Lex Luthor.
Oh,
but even then, there's a lot of issues with that, like Lex Luthor, he doesn't believe in superheroics really either.
Lex Luthor was never part of the Justice League.
Well, right? He is now. He's the acting Superman.
No, I guess Lex Luthor. I think Lex Luthor is one of the closer ones you can say, just because Lex Luthor is doing what he's doing with good intentions. but he's doing it in the wrong way, the same way that Ozymandias is.
Yes. So I would say Lex Luthor is the closest.
Yeah. I'd say Silk Spectre's probably Wonder Woman.
I'd say probably... See, I wouldn't even say that. I feel like that's more like
Black Widow?
Yeah, Silk Spectre's in it for her personal gain, especially her mother, but
I'd say both of them are.
Wonder Woman is purer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman is like purely for justice.
There's not a one-to-one representation of these characters in more popular characters.
Because they're not
they're
actually
all...
likable characters. In a
yeah,
way.
they're all very unique. The closest would be Rorschach and Mr. A.
Yeah.
Steve Ditko's Mr. A.
And I actually want to talk about Rorschach real quick because I felt that Rorschach's character, his character is so broken.
Yes.
And his character is also extremely hypocritical. So he talks about how he doesn't compromise, but yet you see him make compromises all the time, right? He's so critical of other people, yet he's like a parasite. He takes advantage. He makes fun of Dan. He's like, oh, Dan's overweight. He quit, blah, blah, blah. But then, the first thing that you see him do when he goes to try and talk to Dan is steal his fucking beans.
But I'm not sure I agree with that because they're still friends. For example, the fact that...
No, I wasn't saying they weren't friends.
But the fact that I took Rorschach, who destroyed Daniel's newly installed lock on his door 3 times. That is funny, but that is also to me in a way, a really twisted way to show affection, because he goes, look, this isn't keeping you safe. Fucking get a real one. And he leaves him, of course, with, you just wasted money on this fucking thing. Good luck. And I'm just going to go through the door.
Yeah.
But it is...
No, yeah, I get that.
He's bad at showing that he likes a few of these people and appreciates them.
Again, it's this...
No, I
these
agree
characters
with that.
have a really hard time communicating with each other. Because they're all wearing masks. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh my god.
How deep.
Give me back my face.
I think they're bad at communicating with each other because they've spent so much time fighting bad guys that they haven't had a chance to actually develop themselves socially.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent emotionally as well, because they've been so focused on crime fighting that they didn't have a chance to live normal lives. So they're all their emotional growth has been stunted to an extent.
Because and also they've navigated the world through the moral landscape of 80s superhero ethics, which is super inadequate for living a realized actual existence, which is why they're all in these massive slumps. You said earlier about we were talking about Rorschach and Mr. A. So I brought Mr. A up earlier in the podcast in an episode once. He was created by Steve Ditko, who was famously...
Who the fuck is Mr. A?
Well, he's so Steve Ditko created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange with Stan Lee. Steve Ditko did all the work, and then Stan Lee made it palatable to a mass audience. So Steve Ditko would draw Spider-Man, and he'd be swinging around the city, and he'd draw the entire story. And then he'd see protesters, and Spider-Man would say to the protesters, "Get jobs, you dirty hippies." And Stan Lee would change that to be, "Yeah, I'm right with you, stick it to the man," or whatever. Because Steve Ditko was a super objectivist. And with Mr. A, he created... I think Mr. A is sort of the prototype of V for Vendetta, where he tried to distill the superhero into an actual good character in the world he lives in. And for that, he created a really I don't want to say morally warped, but really sort of unpragmatic character. And it's a super interesting book to read, and with because Mr. A is basically Rorschach in a world that is twisted enough for Rorschach to be the good guy. Whereas Rorschach is Mr. A in a real life setting. And
it's funny because I remember seeing an interview with Alan Moore, and Alan Moore said that Steve Ditko actually found out about Rorschach, and Steve Ditko's response to that was,
he's like
Rorschach
Mr.
is basically
except
if he was
he's
insane.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and I think that's a very interesting response, because I feel like he probably misunderstood what the intent behind Rorschach's character. It's not that Rorschach is just your character but crazy. It's that it's Mr. A's character not working in an actual reality.
Yeah.
And so he would come across as crazy as a result.
He is also crazier than Mr. A. But
Sure.
And
but it kind of reminds me of of the Fate series, in that
you like the Fate series. I never knew.
Yes, I do. But the reason it reminds me of that is because the main character of the Fate series is supposed to be a kind of the same sort of thing, where what if you took these stupid, idiotic shonen ideals and you put them in a real world setting? That's the main character. He is uncompromisingly for the sake of justice, but the way that the author contextualizes that in a real world setting in a way that makes sense is by making him a sociopath. The main character, I'm not going to go into detail, but the main character goes through severe trauma in his early childhood that coupled with the morals of his adoptive father, who are also completely fucked. The result is a main character that is mentally not sound, has weird ideas put into his head. There's the shonen protagonist in a real world setting, completely fucked up. And that's why I see the similarity between him and Rorschach. It's a similar type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't played the Fate series, but I can see that.
Yeah. I would love to recommend it for you guys, but it's way too long. I wouldn't put you guys through reading the visual novel. It is very, very long. Maybe one of these days. I don't know. Oh, and just to throw it in, the villain of the Fate series is also, what if we took these shonen villain and put them in a real world setting as well? How would that be explained in a realistic way?
So last thing I want to say about the comic is that, just on a technical level, I appreciate it. It feels very artful in a way where it feels very intended, because
Alan Moore will write pages of details for single panels.
Yeah, and also in the way structurally, things come back. We always go back to the two Bernies, for example, or in the way where what I really appreciated was a lot of the panels end with the end of the sentence of the character that was saying something, and then the sentence carries over in the speech bubble to the next scene.
And it'll be very similar, if not the same imagery.
It has a double meaning.
Yes.
It informs the next scene before the next scene even started. For example, I wrote down one example is when I think they're in the emergency room and they're talking about the nuclear fallout, and then they go, well, we're gonna have trouble with the wind, blowing the nuclear fallout further into the US, and then the president goes, well, the wind is a force of nature, it's totally indifferent or something. And in that scene, the speech bubble carries over to Dr. Manhattan sitting on the moon, just contemplating about, what the fuck
You
are
mean on
humans?
Mars?
On Mars, not the moon, yeah. And that kind of stuff happened all the time. And a lot of the quotes and what the sentences have double meanings. All that stuff that felt so rich. Like you could watch it 3 times and you would still discover new little details.
There's a lot of examples of that in The Funeral, where it's like one of the flashbacks will end and it'll just circle right back to the funeral.
Yeah.
And there's also another cool example of it when Adrian is giving like his backstory in the final or second final issue, right before he opens up the garden to the winter, and he's telling the story of Alexander the Great to these scientists, and then it's like revealed after he's done telling the story that the guys were dead the whole time. And you're like, that's something you can't do that in a movie. In a comic book, you can you don't realize that they're dead because they're just there listening to him.
Yeah, I love that moment as well. That was such a cool moment when I realized that the butterfly was on his nose. I was like, what? He's fucking dead.
There's also a lot of just mirroring panels. There's I believe
there's a lot of panels where like right after another a character's face would be like the center.
Yes.
And then the next one would be a different character.
There's also
and their face would be framed the exact same way.
I believe it's issue 6. I don't remember which one it is. It's the one where the guy quote unquote tries to kill Adrian. The moment he beats him in the face with that pole, every single panel in that comic is reflected, like that's in the exact middle of the comic, and it's mirrored. The panel layout, it's mirrored from that center page, from that middle page, and so there's a lot of deliberate touches like that. There's a lot of use of secondary colors. Comic books back then were all about the primary colors, but with this, it's like, well, how about you take a superhero and you light them in secondary colors to sort of show that this isn't the Technicolor superheroes; these are the real superheroes. So there's a lot of greens, browns, and purples, and it's also faces are very detailed, so you can see stuff like I believe it's Ralph Muller, who is the bodybuilder who was suspected of being Hooded Justice. You can see him in the background. He's having dinner with I believe it's Captain Metropolis or somebody, and the implication, like they're just in the background of like a restaurant scene. In one panel, the two of them are there. They're older, but it's clearly them, and the implication is that Ralph Muller must have faked his death and they just live together now. Because it's implied that he was homosexual, and it's like that incredible detail for something that nobody pointed out until like 2012 or something.
He was a homosexual.
That would explain why.
Also a fascist? Like, didn't he have Nazi ties?
I think he did.
And I'm asking, but I know he had. I remember that detail.
I didn't read Under the Hood or any of the extra stuff. I just went through the comic and then the movie, so I don't quite remember.
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that necessarily invalidates the theory, though, because you could still like espouse those beliefs, but
you could be a repressed homosexual. I just think that's an interesting angle to the character.
And I think it would also explain why, because Silk Spectre kept draping herself over Hooded Justice, but it was specifically stated in Under the Red Hood that like Hooded Justice didn't really seem to have any interest in her.
No.
So him being a homosexual would actually make a lot of sense.
Also, the comedian alluded to it when he was beating him up. He was like, this is what you like. This is what gets you hot, isn't it?
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And
that line didn't really make any sense to me until just now. That's really good.
Yeah. And that's why the Hooded Justice got so furious when he said it that he kept beating him like, what? How dare you? Or something.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So
Comic book
there's
is
a lot of.
so good.
It's so layered. I read it like once every 2 years or something, and I always see so much new stuff in it. It's incredibly dense with content.
Yeah, it really is. Like, I feel like
so dense. Every frame has so much going
I feel
on.
like we could talk.
But like actually,
yeah. I feel like we could probably keep talking about it and keep like discussing details for like another hour if we wanted to. But if no one else has anything else that they want to say, I think we should probably move on to the movie. Is that okay?
No, we have to talk about the Black Freighter first. Then we'll do the movie.
Oh, yes, of course. We'll talk about that.
Who wants to recap the Black Freighter?
Oh, it's
You should do it, Belton.
it's I the thing is, I didn't read the Under the Hood chapter about the Black Freighter. Like that was the part where I was kind of, I don't know, I think it was on the commute and I was like, I don't want to read this. I'm going to skip this. Like, because I was kind of annoyed by the Under the Hood stuff. But I think that that chapter talked more about the background of the Black Freighter comic.
There was one that was all
the story
about
itself is this, I don't know what is he a captain or something?
Yes.
Who is
Well, he was a mariner. I don't know if he's a captain.
mariner whose ship sinks. He's stranded on an island, and I don't know why, but somehow he knows that his hometown has been attacked. He knows this, and he tries desperately to get back, and goes through like a horrific voyage of, the bloated corpses of his former crew, fueling his raft,
He creates
basically,
a raft. Yes.
grabbing a seagull and eating it raw, all that stuff, and then so eventually he makes it back to his mainland, where his home city is, and like he finds people. He's so obsessed with the idea that his wife and his kids are probably dead by now that he thinks everyone he comes across must be an enemy and kills them, enters his house, like invades his own house, thinks there are enemies there too, kills them too, and realizes that was his wife, and then he flees, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he sees the Black Freighter is on the ocean, and he sails to them to become one with them.
And what is the Black Freighter?
The Black Freighter is just the ship of the pirates.
Oh, so they
We
weren't
feared
there
were-
yet?
No. See, the implication of the Black Freighter tale is that they were just waiting for him to do it himself. Right? It's just sort of a supernatural horror story about a man who kills his wife and then goes and becomes one with the monsters he feared. So, what do you think the point of the Black Freighter was?
So it's to my understanding that the Black Freighter is supposed to reflect how Ozymandias's like anxiety and distress and conflicted feeling towards his plan.
Yes. Because it's that line by the mariner where he goes, how could I have done something so horrible with only love as my guide? And that is the Ozymandias dilemma. Where what he did do it because he believed it was the right thing to do. He was motivated by a desire to save the world, to save Petersburg, so to speak, or Peter's town, I believe it was in the Black Freighter.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what you've just done is you've committed a horrible atrocity for no real reason. Like, the Black Freighter wasn't going to attack the town. And likewise, nuclear Armageddon probably wasn't going to come. Like, it didn't come in our world. It didn't happen. Not yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only thing you've really done, like, it's... Yeah. And that's...
Yeah, you haven't really actually accomplished anything.
You've just done a horrible thing driven by your paranoia.
Right.
It's like that Family Guy skit where Brian is...
You dare bring Family Guy into our Watchmen conversation?
where Stewie is like he hurts Brian in some way, and then he goes, okay, Brian, I allow you to hit me back, so we're square. And then Brian goes, okay, I'm gonna hit you, but I won't tell you when. And then Stewie just goes crazy from the paranoia and starts hitting himself and throwing himself in front of cars.
Yeah, it's exactly the same as that.
It's basically the same.
That also reminds me of How I Met Your Mother, where there's like this ongoing gag where Barney is going to get slapped by, I forget his name,
Marshall.
the lawyer dude.
Marshall.
Yeah. And he's going to get slapped by him like 5 times, and he doesn't know when. So, like, there'll just be, like, random parts of the show that's, like, strung about throughout, like, the seasons where he just, like, slaps the shit out of him so hard, just, like, completely out of nowhere. It's the best part of that show.
Yeah. We're gonna pivot to the movie. I kind of want to get some coffee before we go on. One thing I'll note, though, is about the Black Freighter. It's very telling that the Watchmen movie doesn't have the Black Freighter, because without the I don't think Zack Snyder understands Watchmen on a thematic level, and the fact that he omitted the Black Freighter kind of reflects that. Hello everyone, We're back. You interrupted me, Bogan. Hello everyone, We're back. We're back. I'm gonna edit out all of Bogan's interruptions. And we're gonna talk about the movie now. I think it's okay. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's honestly... I don't envy Zack Snyder for... Well, I mean, okay, he's rich and famous, and
he's not.
It's not a hard cross to bear to make this movie, but it's very difficult to turn this into a movie, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think you mean you don't envy his task of trying to adapt it.
Yes, I feel like he did a decent job.
I feel like some of the changes are warranted, like. Sure, I get like not having the giant squid at the end. I understand why he left it out and tried to do a more simplistic ending. Like
even just for the sake of like shortening the movie, I think that's a really sensible change. Because you can't have a 5-hour movie.
So the ending in the movie is that Ozymandias has worked with Dr. Manhattan to create a refilling energy source, basically, or to solve the world's energy crisis. And so he now has access to Dr. Manhattan's energy signature, which is basically a Star Trek thing. Like, I don't know if people can actually read energy signatures. It was very randomly in the 80s, but okay.
Yeah.
And so
well, I mean, Dr. Manhattan
he creates a giant explosion that instead of the squid, like, vaporizes a big chunk of New York, and then blames the explosion on Dr. Manhattan.
London and Moscow and all the world's capitals.
Oh, yeah, right. It's multiple cities. And he blames it on Dr. Manhattan so that the world unites in its battle against Dr. Manhattan. And Dr. Manhattan agrees to it and basically leaves Earth anyway.
Yes.
Which I guess it's sensible in a way, but also...
What I mean is it's sensible if you are going to remove all of the buildup that was in the comic book to the other plan.
Yes.
You know, like the Squid Plan.
Also,
like,
I feel
if you
like
weren't going to do that,
the alien threat is more credible than
Yeah.
the Earth knows who Dr. Manhattan is. I feel like the alien threat would solve a better issue to solve for all the world leaders.
Yeah, but Dr. Manhattan, see, the Rorschach's journal in the end, Dr. Manhattan could theoretically negate that if he hadn't left Earth. Like, that could have been revealed, and then Dr. Manhattan could just return and destroy something else and say, Rorschach was crazy! I'm actually evil! And then leave again. But, in terms of Zack Snyder's work on that movie, I don't begrudge the failures of the movie really to him. I think you can
some
say
of the failures are,
yes,
but in his defense, there's a reason why this film was considered unfilmable. Like, there are several aspects of it that were very specifically taking advantage of comic books as a medium.
yes.
And that stuff does not translate in a film.
And it's also, when I say this, like, there's stuff like he gave Ozymandias, famously, he gave him Batman Return Forever nipples. Like, I don't like that stuff, but like, I don't.
Why did he do that?
He thought it would be a funny reference. That's legitimate. That's it. See, I don't like that. I think his costume in the comic book is so beautiful and so telling of this, like, really how like deep into his own beliefs he is. But
like, yeah, no, I agree with you.
But
especially,
but that's
since
like that's like, I can forgive that. Like, that's just a little visual thing that doesn't really bother me. What bothers me is I don't think he understands Watchmen. I don't think Damon Lindelof, who wrote the script, understands Watchmen. I talked to you guys about the Watchmen TV show. I watched some of that. I don't think he gets it. Like, just with Ozymandias, for example, in the movie, he's just a bad guy. Like, there's no pretense of him being like a guy who's, I'm gonna try to save the world or anything. That stuff is all dropped, and his sort of doubts, because in the comic book, he's like really like paranoid over what he's doing. Like, he set the plan in motion, but he doesn't quite believe in it, and he's very sort of skeptical, and he has to reassure himself by asking Dr. Manhattan whether he did the right thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. Like, he even asks Dr. Manhattan afterwards for his opinion, and Dr. Manhattan's like, "Whatever, dude. I'm going to Mars." You know, like.
And he does ask him his opinion in the movie, but it's so cold. It should be more.
It's very shallow.
Yeah,
that line. I felt every single death of those 3 million or whatever.
Yeah.
In the book,
whereas
I
in the
believed
comic book,
it.
Yeah, and it's also, you see his face also. It's because Matthew Good has a really sort of good sociopath face, but he isn't very expressive, the actor who played Ozymandias in the movie.
Well, also his performance. I mean, I don't know if it's the direction of it or whatever, but it's so
It's
smug.
Yeah, it's so sinister, whereas it should be a very, very warm.
Yeah.
Right? It should be Adrian Veidt on screen. He should feel like a Brad Pitt, not Brad Pitt. He should just be a really warm and sort of gentle man who you like. That guy could be Superman, basically.
Like, when in the comic book, when he turns on all the TVs to show all the world leaders are like, "Hey, you know, we're gonna talk this out. We're gonna stop conflict." Blah blah.
He's
Adrian,
thrilled.
yeah, he's like, "I did it!" He fucking yells and he screams. He's like, "Yes, I saved the world." You know, like, I brought world peace. He's so excited. In the movie, he just kind of matter of factly is like, "Look, see, they've all stopped." Like, it's so weird. It's such a bizarre way to, like, interpret the character.
I really like that line though, where he's like, "What's that, Adrian? Another super weapon?" Yeah, I guess you could say that, and then he just turns on the TV. I really like that.
Yeah, I'll grant that.
But no, and it's in the TV show too, where Jeremy Irons, I don't think he's a bad cast, even though he is just generally very sinister as a human being. He has a sinister look to him. He's not. He's supposed to be just a deluded superhero. He's not supposed to read as a bad guy.
So I need to ask, since you've seen the series,
I've seen.
Is it a sequel to the comic, or is it a sequel to the movie?
To the comic. But if you watch the movie, you can like 95% get it. They basically explain the squid, so you like they explain that the squid happens, and then that's really the only difference between the comic and the show and the movie, which the show acknowledges as important.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
this movie was weird.
It's, I think, almost perfectly cast.
The guy who did Rorschach was great.
Jackie
the guy
Earle
who did
Haley.
Comedian was fantastic.
Jeffrey Dean Morgan, yes. Patrick Wilson, I think, is perfect. I think he's my favorite casting choice in that movie. And I want him to play Mr. Fantastic in the Marvel movies when they make the Fantastic Four again.
But one of the thing that I took away from this film was that it felt like Zack Snyder is like he's a genuine fan of these characters. And as such, he tries to portray the characters in the movie in like the best light possible.
Yes.
When that is not
that misses
really
the point.
How these characters that's not how these characters should be portrayed. Like
he fought to remove Night Owl's erectile dysfunction. He fought to remove that. No, well, his impotence. He didn't want to do that because he felt like that sort of, I don't want to do like a slubby guy. I don't want to have him be this pathetic. That's the point of the character.
That's the point.
And that's where I say, like they got that through. But I feel like also the point of Watchmen was missed by the movie.
Like the way that the fight scenes played out, for example, like you had even the way that the comedian dies at the very beginning of the movie was all wrong.
Yeah.
Like you have this extended fight scene that looks really cool. The comedian, like you could argue like, yeah, well, the comedian didn't do a very good job fighting Adrian because he didn't really get a good hit in. But at the same time,
he's like punching through walls, and it's
like in a sense it's kind of glorifying his character.
Yeah.
A character who is an enormous piece of fucking shit.
Yeah.
The way that he died in the comic book was exactly what he deserved. He was an awful person, and he died a death befitting of such a person. He was beaten, thrown out a window, and killed.
Yeah.
That's what he deserved. He did not deserve this final stand where he gets to fight it out in a cool fight, in his last breath, like just before he died. He didn't deserve that.
No. I also think about the comedian in the movie. Not that the comic really bends over backwards to try to make him redeemable, because he is a completely amoral monster. But in the comic, I am a bit more sympathetic to him. Like, there's a scene in both the comic and the movie where he rapes Sally Jupiter, who's Silk Spectre.
Or attempts.
Well, he attempts to rape her. And in the comic book, it's I don't want to say redeemable, because it's clearly not redeemable, but you could read that as he's a 19-year-old who was beaten by his dad, who's been in the military, who's never belonged anywhere, and who's never, like, again, he doesn't know how to communicate. And he's never been taught that, so he doesn't know, like, he knows what he's doing is wrong, and it is clearly wrong, and there's no apologizing for it, but you can kind of see that, like, it ties into that theme of people being bad at communicating with each other. Whereas in the
I think what you're saying is right, because of a line that was in the comic but not in the movie, where he says, "Hey, she wanted it. She was asking for it."
Yeah.
In his mind, he genuinely thought, like, she was into it.
Yeah.
He even said like, "Oh, no means yes."
Yeah, no
Like,
spelled Y-E-S. And she goes, no spelled N-O. And
like she
in the
he-
movie,
like yeah, he was a 19-year-old. Like in the movie,
he's a very oily 19-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. They probably should have hired a lookalike actor that was younger to try and get that across better.
Doesn't he have a mask on in that entire scene?
I think so.
Yeah, they should have just used a younger actor, had the mask on, and then people wouldn't have been bothered.
Well,
Yeah.
you still need an actor who can pull off that performance.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure. That probably would have been difficult, to be fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
But
you
it's
could,
those
yeah,
small
I get what you're
little-
saying. It's not excusable in the slightest, but it's at least to an extent understandable from the perspective of a socially inept 19-year-old that doesn't understand women.
Mm. It's also it's all these little tiny human moments which we've been talking about for like an hour in the comic. They're not really done justice in the movie.
No,
Like
they're mostly cut.
Yeah, they're mostly cut, or they're
Understandably.
yeah, and it's like that whole bean juice talk we had. You pointed it out, didn't you, Boken? Where
No, Daniel.
No, that was me.
that was Daniel. In the comic book, when Rorschach hands Daniel the smiley face, Daniel asks him whether the blood splatter is, "Oh, is this bean juice?" And Rorschach goes, "Yeah, haha, human bean juice." In the movie, he goes, "Human bean juice." Bats belong, like, and he just keeps on going. There, like in the book, you can it's this guy who's like a really sort of, ew, you would joke about that. Whereas
like he has this twisted sense of humor.
Yeah.
And he thought it was hilarious, and he was joking about it. But in the movie, the dialogue is kept.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big problem with the movie in general, where like certain lines
it works
are
in a
kept.
comic book. It doesn't work when you say it.
It's not even just that it works in a comic book, but like the context of which the lines are used in the movie don't work.
Yeah.
Because like either the scene was misunderstood or it just wasn't presented right. Like again, Rorschach says it as a joke in the comic book, but he says it completely straight in the movie, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And here's another example of a line that was kept from the comic book that makes sense in the comic book but doesn't make sense in the movie. When Adrian catches the bullet, he kicks Laurie right after that.
Oh yes.
And then he like fucking Night Owl literally sees him kicking her, and he says, "Oh, if you've hurt her, I'll."
Yeah.
What do you mean if you've hurt? You literally just saw him kick
And
her.
what happened in the comic?
In the comic, she doesn't get kicked.
Oh, okay. I think
So,
she
like-
gets kicked, but at a different moment. I'm pretty sure
I think
he kicks her at some point.
Like I think he doesn't. Like she may have been kicked. I don't remember at the moment, but I know for sure. Like he didn't see her get hurt. So the line makes more sense in the comic book because he's not sure if she got kicked or not, or if she's been struck. While in the movie, he literally sees it happen. So why is he saying if? What do you mean if? You saw it happen.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of crazy how much of the lines were literally taken from the comic book and planted into the movie. Like, I get your criticism. I think a lot of the lines still work. And since I saw the movie way before I read the comic book, I thought those lines were pretty good. Now that I watched it again, I realized that they were all fucking copied wholesale from the original
Yes.
work. The whole monologue in the beginning, that whole thing with I'm not stuck in here with you, you're stuck in here with me. That entire thing, like, so much of it is word for word what is in the comic book.
Yes.
Yes. But there
And
is
I think
also
it worked, and like in the way that scene specifically, the way it was done in the movie compared to the comic book was different. Like you literally see it as it's happening in the movie, while in the comic book, it's like it's the psychiatrist talking to Rorschach about it as it like in the past tense. And I think that that subtle difference is important because in the movie, it's glorifying that scene as this badass, awesome moment. In the comic book, it's seen more as like, this guy has issues. Like, the way that he's acting is a problem.
There's also I think there's a problem with Rorschach's voice in the movie. In the comic, his speech bubbles are very jaggedy and like they're not smooth like everyone else's because he's got a really fractured psyche.
Except during the
flashbacks. Then he speaks. That's before Kitty. What's the girl's name?
Yeah, the little girl that gets murdered.
Yeah, that's before that. In the movie, the flashback has him using the exact same voice. So it's a very. Yeah. I think the movie is a really it's a really good surface level adaptation of all the panels and all the stuff that happens, but the meaning is sort of lost.
I kind of put it like this. It's faithful in content, but not in meaning or context.
Yes. Some changes that I think are totally fine. Let's see. Let's
say something nice about the movie.
I think it's shot really well, and I think a lot of the music choices are really cool. Except for maybe Hallelujah during the sex scene. While we're on the music
choices, I wanted to ask you, what the fuck is the American fascination with 99 Luftballons? I don't get it.
I don't know. I don't know.
It's in everything.
Isn't that the German national anthem?
It's a nice song. I don't know. It's a nice song, I guess. I really don't know.
Do you guys know what it's about? I mean, it's about the Cold War, basically.
It's about balloons that go on a radar and trigger a false nuclear alert, isn't it?
Yes. Well, they trigger an escalation of two army generals who basically get both countries into a full-out war because one of the generals took them for UFOs.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the movie's defense, that song kinda makes some sense, given that the Cold War is,
Yeah, but But the scene it's played in is when Laurie is walking into the restaurant to meet Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. That's really true. It does no it has been. It's the thing. That's the thing with Zack Snyder's directing is he does things from the perspective of aesthetics.
Yes.
And he doesn't do it with the oh, this means something in this scene. He's just doing it because it sounds good in this cool scene.
That's the fucking.
Look at this. That's his mindset.
The song is also in Scrubs, for example, where I just told you what it's about, but they use it in a scene where they have a German patient and they start dancing for some reason, with actual balloons around them.
I don't remember that, but I haven't seen Scrubs in 10 years. So
I'm so tired of that fucking song, man. So
hey, can we talk about how great Patrick Wilson is as a massive nerd in that movie?
As a massive what?
Nerd. Remember when Laurie, in the scene we're talking about, she walks into the restaurant. Do you guys remember what he's doing?
He's cleaning his glasses.
Yeah, and he's he puts them on, and then she walks in, and he's like, And then,
his goofy grin. Yeah. He's just ooh.
And then there's that scene.
And he's got the Bill Nye the Science Guy fucking bow tie.
And there's that scene in the flashback with a comedian where they're protesting, and he's like, "Oh man, what are we doing, man? What happened to the American dream?"
Honestly,
that didn't translate in the comic just like that. That's the performance.
I thought he was a good cast, though.
I think he was
for Night Owl.
No, I mean that performance gives it a new flair, just because he's actually voicing it.
Yeah. I think he did a really good job. I'd say this is one of the few cases where I feel like the movie added something.
Yes, Rorschach's
of substance.
Rorschach's death. I think it's better in the movie.
I think that too.
I think having Night Owl witness the death as well, and him having that emotional breakdown, was really good.
Yeah.
I feel like if that was in the comic book, I think that would have made his death
It also would have gone maybe some ways towards him and Laurie having sex make a bit more sense In that,
yeah, I could see that too, because he's emotionally distraught from like seeing his essentially his best friend just like vaporized in his face.
Yeah.
Also, I'm gonna say I think most of the prison sequence is actually better in the movie. There's
Really?
especially that one shot where Rorschach kills that little guy. I want to call him Baby, but Baby is from
His name is
from
Big
Monster.
Figure.
What?
Yeah, I actually like that too.
He's the
but
big
my
figure.
problem with the prison scene is they added that fight scene, which was totally
That
unnecessary.
was really
and
unnecessary. But that shot with the
so
revolving door where it keeps going back and forth and Rorschach always
That
comes
was
to
cool.
That's so cool. And then
Yeah, that was
what
good.
also made more sense to me is that scene where they try to get into Rorschach's cell and he like binds the fat guy's hands together.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't reach the lock. And in the comic book, they slit that guy's throat instead of hacking off his arms, which is what they actually should be doing, which is what they do in the movie to get to fucking get to the lock.
Yeah.
Like, why did
I'll
they
say
keep-
though, something
here's-
that bothers me about that, they only needed to cut off one arm.
Okay.
Here's my problem though with that scene. Where the fuck did they get that buzzsaw?
I don't think that really matters.
Like,
That's
I
how
think
prisons
I
work.
think it
isn't
does to an extent.
You get everything you want.
The big
you're-
figure
if you're
gets
famous
what he
enough.
wants, baby.
I mean, at least, like, I get what you're saying in the comic book. It was a little weird that they slit his throat, but at the very least, having a shiv makes sense in a prison. Where the fuck did that buzzsaw come from?
Well,
Yeah.
by the way, one thing I wanted to ask is, in the movie, it's shown that the comedian killed John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that in the comic? Did I
It's
miss that?
inferred.
I think it's revealed in one of those, like, either in the under the hood or something like that. Like one of those.
I think the only
Or
time
it's at least implied.
there he jokes about it. There's a scene where I believe he's in the White House or somewhere in a party. It's the scene where Lori and throws a drink in his face. Before she does that, he's talking to some politician or senator or somebody, and he says, "Oh, don't ask me about." Somebody asks him about, "Well, what do you think about what the Soviets are doing?" or something like that, or "What do you think about this Noriega guy?" And the comedian says, "I don't know, but don't ask me where I was when Kennedy was being shot," or something like that. And he says it as a joke. Whereas in the movie, it's
taken literally.
yeah, he just, oh, here it is. He killed Kennedy. Which also doesn't really make any sense.
That makes no sense because the comedian became a government agent later, right? After the Keene Act.
Yeah. And I think the Keene Act is supposed to canonically start in...
Yeah, like why would the
78?
comedian kill the president, but then also want to work for the government?
Yeah.
Well, because sources inside the government wanted John F. Kennedy dead. It's called the deep state, Daniel.
Oh, okay.
I'm cutting
sorry.
that out.
What?
Yeah, there's also another line, speaking of socialists, there's a line in the movie which I hate the way it's delivered. It's in the scene where Adrian is almost being the fake assassination on Adrian. The guy who's like talking down to Adrian, he's going like, "The people want free energy. Well, free is just another word for socialist." It's just like that. The delivery of that line, it always takes me out of the movie. But it's like, what?
Dude, if we're talking about lines
it's a
that
bit
take...
over the top.
Okay, if we're talking about over the top and lines that take you out of the movie, how about fucking the original Silk Spectre? Like, that actress was hamming it up. It was so awful.
She was
and the makeup
I
was
think she
terrible,
was
too.
I think she was perfect in all the flashbacks.
No, in the flashback she was perfect, but like in the present day stuff, it was awful. And like the lines when they were delivered in the comic book, it felt like she was just kind of casually talking to her daughter, but in the movie, it's like she's giving a speech almost to her daughter. Like she's talking with so much gravitas. Like what she's saying is so important. It's so weird. Like
I think they sort of sacked.
Yeah, it was
they sort of
bad.
They took the humanity out of all those. That's another example of like taking the humanity out of these characters, maybe for the sake of brevity. But the Watchmen comic book ends with her kissing a photo of the comedian, in spite of how horrible he was and all the horrible things he did to her.
No,
it ends with
it ends with Rorschach's journal being found, which is like the best panel ever.
Her story arc, I should say, ends. That's the scene immediately before the journal gets delivered, right? Yeah, that's a really like powerful human moment. It's not in the movie.
Well, the entire subplot of Laurie discovering who her father is was kind of undercooked. All the elements in the movie were undercooked compared to the comic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like even the way that Laurie figures out that the comedian was her father, like there was a lot of buildup in the comic book, like even within that scene, and in the movie she just gets like like Dr. Manhattan just like shows it to her.
Yeah.
And then she breaks his glass palace. I'm like, what? Like the shot in the comic book of her throwing the bottle of nostalgia, the cologne or the perfume, has so much more meaning to it, because the idea of nostalgia is that we look back fondly in the past.
Yeah.
And during that moment, she's looking back into the past for something traumatic. And it's showing her that the past is not as beautiful and as rosy as she would like to think it is. It carries deep-seated hurt and trauma, and something that she was forced to be confronted with. And she can't just hide behind, the pleasantries of the past. She needs to be confronted with the ugliness of it as well.
Or photo album of staged events.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene, there's also a payoff again. That the comic book goes back to that when she's making love to Dan in the end, where she asks him, "Oh, what's that smell, Dan?" Oh,
he says nostalgia.
It's Nostalgia by Veidt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
but that entire sequence on the Mars where Dr. Manhattan shows her the wonders of Mars, which was so much better in the comics, and it had so much more build-up that he actually then reached the conclusion of, no, I need to come back to Earth because humans are like the biggest wonder of them all.
Yeah. Basically. He was too disinterested in the movie, the delivery of the lines. I think Billy Crudup was perfectly cast, but I think he should have been a bit more sort of enamored by Mars.
Yeah, like I had a problem with how Dr. Manhattan sounded in the movie. Like he sounded like he was on the verge of tears sometimes. It sounded strange. Like there was something about it. I couldn't put my finger on it. Like the way that Dr. Manhattan at least came across to me was more like he was above everything and he was disinterested. And in the movie, he sounded so soft, and he was just like, I am tired of these people and their little problems. Like, what? It's just, what? It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, I'm not sure how you could translate the way that Dr. Manhattan speaks into like a normal speaking voice, like, because it's a comic book for a reason, right? Like, he's not meant to sound like one specific way. It's supposed to be interpretive to a certain extent. So the way that he sounded to me in my head is going to sound different to, other people. And it's going to be difficult to pin that down. So I'll let Zach off the hook in this regard, just because, how do you get that across well? You really can't, I don't think. I think, like, he could have picked any voice, and I probably still wouldn't feel right about it.
Yeah. Attention to detail, though, in the movie. There was not an album. There was a book that came out of photographs where it compared panels of the comic book and scenes in the movies. Background characters in the movies the actors look like the tiny little illustrations of the people in the comic. Like when you have the...
That's pretty cool. I'll grant.
Yeah.
I'll give him that. That's pretty cool.
When I think it's on the... Is it the Phil Donahue show where Dr. Manhattan loses it and goes to Mars? It's on...
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you can watch... I think every single person in the audience... There's like... They are wearing what the character in their seat wore. In the comic.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty
Okay,
crazy.
I didn't realize he went that... I didn't realize it was that detail oriented. Like, I realized as I was watching it, I'm like, okay, some of these look like very on point. Like, especially when he was yelling and he teleported everyone, like, that looked very, very much the same as it was in the comic.
I like how the softness of his voice and that sort of monotonous droning of his voice was changed when he was screaming. He just lost it. He lost it.
Yeah.
But also, like, the movie, the comic book, remember when she goes on a date with Dan? She's, like, calling him or something, and there's, like, a little shot of him, and he's, like, smiling. They're, like, all these little human moments. Gone. Not in the movie. And then when he blows up, you're like, Jesus Christ, this guy is... What is this guy? He doesn't have any humanity.
Yeah, like, especially when I was reading the comic book, it felt like his character had so much more humanity in it. That was not in the movie.
Yeah.
You know what I just realized? I think when I watched this movie 10 years ago, I must have watched the ultimate cut? Whatever you watched, Daniel. Because I remember the former Night Owl getting murdered. And that wasn't in the version I watched. But I knew about that.
Yeah, that is...
I knew about that when I
say-
started reading the comic.
That's a really good scene.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really liked how his death was handled in the movie. I think it
It's sort of...
gave him the respect he deserved.
Also, like, he's reliving his glory days, but in reality, he's just being beaten to death. Like, that scene, I think, really captured the point of Watchmen. But very little else did. Well, the point of Watchmen, the point of that scene in the comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what else? Is there anything else to talk about the movie?
It's
I
fine.
think I like this. I like the songs. I think they're a bit on the nose. It's kind of obvious movie
They're pretty
choices.
on the nose, yeah. And not very consistent.
No.
Yeah.
It has a very distinct visual look. I think they did a decent job upgrading it for the most part.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was shot very well. You know, the visual style was very nice.
I was kind of bothered by some of the outfits, like Night Owl's outfit, for example, but you can't really take the one in the comic book and translate it to
I think you could-
a movie from the 2009.
I think you could do it. I think you could do it now. I don't think you could have done it back then. But I think people would accept
Night
it now.
Owl looked too cool in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, I think part of the point is that Night Owl looks kind of silly because that's the point. Superheroes are silly.
Yeah. I like that though.
But,
that
like,
contrast.
But
where-
Zack Snyder's like, no, it's gotta be cool. Like even like the snow outfit that Night Owl wears towards the end of the film, it kind of looks cute. Like,
But it looked cute
Because
in
that's
the
what-
book, though. I really liked that one.
no, that's what I mean. In the book, it looked cute, and in the movie, it looks cool.
Did they have
And
the?
again?
Did they have
That's
the?
kind of missing the point.
Yeah, I like it though because he's like this. It's like if you just put a nerd in the Batman Begins uniform, the Batman Begins costume.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't get past that scene. Like, oh, what are we doing, man? He's like an '80s nerd. You don't see those guys in movies anymore.
Yeah,
He's like a Rick Moranis kind of nerd.
I also liked that Night Owl freaked out more in the movie over Hollis's death.
Yeah.
Like in the book, he was kind of bummed about it. And Rorschach was able to calm him down faster. But in the movie, he just flipped out. He got really angry and started just like beating the shit out of that punk. And I actually thought that was better. Like,
Yeah.
because he cared really deeply about
I
Hollis, and I think him like getting that emotional makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think I have any issue with Night Owl in the movie. I think every change is good or at least justifiable. Like with the costumes, I don't think it would have worked to have him in the comic book costume.
No,
in that movie.
I can see that for sure.
The fight scenes were too much.
Yeah,
They were.
yeah. You could justify it as these are characters, like they have just fake knuckles, fake bones that had everything replaced. But even if you can justify it in universe somehow, and I don't think you can, even if you can, it sort of misses the point. Right? It's the comic book is exactly about how superheroics aren't able to solve problems. The movie is about how, and then they just have a 2-minute fight sequence, and that solves the problem.
Yeah.
I feel like the characters were made too powerful in the film.
Yeah.
Like they were given a slight boost, they were given super strength. Like when the comedian, like you were saying before, he punched the wall and stuff. There was a scene where Rorschach was going to tackle into Ozymandias, and he literally jumps over him, like jumping up like 10 feet or something. Like, he looked ridiculous.
And it's important for that story to have that power imbalance between Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan and the other guys.
Yeah.
Which kind of gets narrowed when you also see Silk Spectre and Night Owl fighting thugs and then flying around.
In the comic book, remember, he just stabbed Rorschach with a fork. And then he had Bubastis sort of circling in between him and Rorschach and Night Owl because he didn't really want to fight both of them at the same time.
Yeah, he had the Bubastis kind of there to keep them in check.
Yeah.
Because, like, he's good enough to keep them at bay while fighting them for a while, but he's still human. He would get tired of trying to fight both of them at the same time. So he needed Bubastis there. While in the movie, he just effortlessly just fucking fights both of them easily. And I think that kind of diminishes their characters a bit. Like, these two, like, yeah, we know that Ozymandias is like the peak of like human performance or whatever. But like, at the same time,
the thing is,
Night Owl and Rorschach, have been doing this shit for years. Like,
yeah.
They wouldn't get beaten like this badly.
But it's also, we don't know that in the movie. In the comic book, there's like a sequence where we see him on like a charity event where he's doing like these some gymnastics or something, and they're showing like, he's maintained his physical prowess.
Exactly.
And
yes,
and when Rorschach says before they go to Antarctica, he says that, like, I couldn't imagine a more dangerous enemy. He could kill both of us in the snow, and nobody would know about it. Like that, he's been built.
There's no build up to that.
Yeah, in the comic book, it works. In the movie, kind of doesn't. I do like how I like the fight scenes just isolated. I think it's sort of cool to me how even the slightest touches send people flying all over the place. I like that as just a cool visual effect.
Sure, if we look at the fight scenes like divorced from the story, they're fun fight scenes.
Yeah.
They're cool to watch. But because you can't divorce them from the story, that's the problem. They don't really work in that regard. The fights in the comic are like a means to an end. You're not meant to actively enjoy the violence.
Yeah.
They're just for the sake of either like progressing the story or getting some kind of point across.
Yes.
I feel like we've been really down on this movie, and like I think it mostly comes down to the fact that it's on its own, it's a decent movie.
Yeah.
But we're comparing decent to like a truly great piece of work. The comic book is really fantastic. It's super detailed. It's got a lot of depth to it. There's a lot of humanity. And it's just disappointing and kind of frustrating to see all of those elements that we've come to love and appreciate in the source material not represented well or just completely removed.
Yeah. And if anyone who's listening to this, if you like the movie, that's totally fine. It is it is a good movie, and there's nothing wrong with liking it.
Yeah, like I would argue that it's if I were to be a little more unbiased, I guess, and like completely remove my my newfound appreciation for the comic book and just like look at the movie as its own thing, it's a perfectly fine movie. It does have some issues, even not looking at it as an adaptation, but overall, it's pretty good. I think most of our issues come from like, yeah, it missed the point, didn't do this right, it completely glossed over this, which, it doesn't understand the source material and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I don't like they said it was unfilmable. I don't think it's unfilmable. I think it's unfilmable to everyone's satisfaction. Because that's a good point. There is too much going on in that story to make a movie. If you want to make a TV show about it, then it's sort of even if you did a TV show, you gave it the time it needed. The fact that you're translating it across a medium means that something is going to be lost, because the comic book is sort of examining the tradition of superhero comic books. There is no great tradition of superhero TV shows. There are some, but there's no great tradition to analyze. So there is no way to do this perfectly for everybody.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Before we wrap this up, I'm wondering, do we want to take a bit of a moment now to talk about the sequel to Watchmen?
No, I actually want to watch that.
I'm talking about the comics and all that stuff. So
I mean, I never read any of it, so
yeah. Okay, so and I'm not really going to talk about details. I'm more just talking about the sort of behind the scenes. Watchmen. The idea when Alan Moore wrote it was that the rights would return to him when Watchmen went out of circulation, which back in the day would mean like, oh yeah, in 4 months. Watchmen has never been out of circulation, and he's never getting the rights back, and he's very pissy about it to this day. And to DC's credit, for about 30 years, they left Watchmen completely alone. They didn't do anything with it. It was his own work. There was no sequel. There was no prequels done. There was nothing done. Then the movie came, and the sort of valve was turned, where we got Before Watchmen, which is a really bad prequel series to it. It's not bad. It's just unnecessary, and it adds absolutely nothing to the original work, and it's not really good on its own. It's fun if you want to see more illustrations of these characters, I guess, but that's all you can really get out of it. With the exception of the Ozymandias title, because that's illustrated by a person whose name I forget, but they do such beautiful artwork. I'll put some maybe illustrations on the screen right now for you people watching. Then they did Doomsday Clock, which was basically so DC rebooted their universe in 2010, I believe, with the New 52, where they just went back to the basics, like, we're gonna start over. And then people bought a lot of comics, and then they stopped, and a lot of the changes they made were very unpopular with the comic book fans. So DC essentially went, oh, well, we'll just do Rebirth, where we're gonna undo the reboot in-universe. And all the changes that people liked, we'll keep them, and the changes people hate will change. So the New 52 Superman is dead. The old Superman is back, and he has a kid now, and it's pretty great. But they did Doomsday Clock, where they basically explained that in Rebirth they explained that the New 52, the reboot of the universe, that was done by Dr. Manhattan. Like, the Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan, came to the DC universe and restarted it. How does that sound to you guys?
That doesn't sound like something he would do.
No. How does it sound to you, then, that Ozymandias and Rorschach, a new Rorschach, travel to the DC universe and fight the DC superheroes in their attempt to solve the mystery of what is of trying to save their world, because Ozymandias' plan was undone by Rorschach's journal. In their attempt to save the world, they travel to the DC universe and they meet with Batman and Lex Luthor and all that good jazz.
Sounds fucking awful.
Yeah. How does it sound to you that the comedian is alive again and he throws
What?
Ozymandias out a window?
What?
What?
Why? How?
Who thought this was a good idea?
I only read like 2 or 3 issues of it, and I don't
How is he
I don't know.
alive? Like, you can't just take some
Nah,
of
I
the
think-
story and continue it,
I
and
think-
then ignore other parts and rewrite
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I suppose I'm guessing the excuse is that he took him from another parallel dimension,
Yeah.
but that makes even less sense.
Let's bring this person back into our world.
Yeah, so they've been very.
I
think
I hate this already.
Yeah, I think DC has been very disrespectful to Watchmen's legacy with pretty much all the extended stuff they've done since 2009, and the movie
I thought
came.
this was a good idea.
It's written by Jeff Johns, who's, I believe he's currently the head of DC production. So he's the guy who's just in charge of all the comic book stuff over at DC. And look, reading it, it's not like it's fun in a sort of schlocky kind of way. And the characters, I would say, are on point for who they are, but there's not a lot of like. It is sort of, at least a bad taste in the mouth.
Just dumb.
There's a cool scene, however, when Batman has like the yellow button, and he's just like, "What's going on with the button?" And that's cool. But I like don't. They were trying to like rectify the editorial mistakes over at DC with their retconning of the reboot of the universe. And they just dragged Watchmen into the she made Dr. Manhattan shoulder the burden of their editorial mistakes.
That's so weird.
So, however, Alan Moore, that's the final word I'm gonna have on this, I think. I don't have any sympathies to Alan Moore's quarrels with these companies using his stories. I was sympathetic, but I'm not anymore, because he is kind of an asshole. I love him, but he's a massive prick.
He does seem like that, to be fair.
He and even like he feels like he was cheated out of the rights of Watchmen. The thing is, he wasn't. Like, this, when it goes out of print, it will belong to him. It just never will go out of print because it was too good. And the thing is, though, he has been offered the rights to Watchmen back. DC has come to him and said, like, if you write us a sequel to Watchmen, we will just give you the license wholesale. They've gone, I believe shortly after the movie, they asked him, if you write us a Batman comic, or a Superman comic or something, we'll give you the rights. And he always says no. So if he is really that pissy about it, like, he has had ample opportunities to have his grievances resolved, and he just doesn't take them because he's an asshole.
I mean, to be fair, he doesn't. For him, he sees that like DC backstab him. He doesn't want to work with them anymore because of that, and.
Yeah.
You know, whether you agree with him actually being backstabbed or not, I think you can at least understand the sentiment of feeling backstabbed and not wanting to work with the people that backstabbed you.
Yeah,
again.
sure, but it's not the people who backstabbed him. Like, that entire editorial board, they're all gone.
Sure.
And the people who run it now, they're massive fans of his, and they would do nothing but accommodate him if only he would, be a bit nicer. But this is he has principles and he sticks to them, and he can do that if he wants to. But I think he's being a jackass, and I think he should write a sequel to Watchmen.
I don't think he should.
I think
I don't think we need a sequel. I don't think we need a sequel.
He planned a sequel initially. This was Watchmen was written as the story. It was left it works as a standalone, but he left it as I'm gonna return to this universe.
Mm.
And if not, I don't. You know what? I'm gonna take that back. I don't want him to write a sequel. I want to see what his idea for a sequel was. I want him to just write out, this is what I was gonna do next.
I mean, okay, I'm not gonna lie. It is intriguing.
Yeah. Especially...
I do want to... If he did have a sequel planned, I would like to know. But I don't need it.
Yeah.
Watchmen is fine as is.
Yeah, but I really want to know what his plan was, because I keep seeing them make sequels and add-ons and extensions to Watchmen, and they never work. And when, I think every extension works on some level, but there's always something missing. The TV show, it works on some level, but there's something missing there.
Here's the thing, though. Do you think Alan still has it in him? Do you think he...
No.
Do you think he could write... No. Okay.
Well... So he's retired from writing just in general. He's done. He released Jerusalem, which is his 1,000,000-word book, and then he just quit. So he's never going to do it.
You never know. Hayao Miyazaki said... I fucking retired and quit after Ponyo. And then he's like, wait a minute, I got The Wind Rises. I got one more in me. So you never know with these old
true. But,
crotchety motherfuckers. They change their mind.
I don't want to chew out Hayao Miyazaki, but I think Alan Moore is a bit more crotchety than him. But, you never know. I don't know. You would... Scientifically speaking, he would be wiser now than he was when he originally wrote Watchmen, right?
Technically, sure, but I don't know. He's also I'm sure. When you're younger, well, he wasn't that young, I don't think. Well, it was 40 years ago at this point.
What are you talking about?
Also, this idea that old people just grow wiser and wiser with age is kind of. I'm sure you know a lot of dumb grandpas.
That's not necessarily true. Not only that, but
everyone who is older than me is a fool.
I was gonna say, when you're younger, you also have a fire in your belly. You have a really strong passion and desires to create and see things through the end. I think
that's me.
The older you get, the less of a fuck you start giving.
Yeah. I also, whether or not I want him to do it, I think. The time to do it has passed. Because Watchmen was a really sort of surgical look at superheroes in a very specific time. And that time was 30 years ago. And what superheroes are today, it really... I don't think...
It's not the same.
Yeah, and if you're gonna continue that thread in Watchmen 2, are you gonna keep criticizing the superheroes of 1985? Because that's been done to death at this point. So that's not going to work.
It wouldn't have the same impact anymore.
And if you were to criticize the superheroes of today, that doesn't really work as a sequel, and that should maybe just be its own thing.
Sure. Not only that, but given what you said about him, it doesn't seem like he's even kept up to date.
Yeah.
So I don't think he could realistically
make
potent criticism.
He doesn't get Harry Potter. How's he going to get Watchmen? Watchmen.
That's
how's
assuming
he gonna get,
he's read Harry Potter.
Yeah. How does he get what superheroes are now? So I want to know what his plans were, how extensive they were, but I guess I don't want to see it. And I think people should stop making Watchmen stuff. Stop doing these stupid sequels and prequels. Just leave it alone.
Watchmen is done.
It's done. Superheroes were a mistake. That's Alan Moore.
I mean,
anime was a mistake.
Yeah, that's my reference.
True. Speaking of anime, you guys are gonna watch Gungrave.
I knew it. Fuck.
Yeah,
Why don't you give me a chance to say it, you fucker? I knew that was gonna be coming.
That's gonna be the next spoiler cast. We're gonna watch the anime
Gungrave. Let's veto it. Just be dicks.
No. It's good.
Yeah.
Like 10 minutes ago, I thought, Daniel's gonna give us Gungrave. I know.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's gonna be the next spoiler cast. So enjoy.
Yeah, let's enjoy that. And one day.
And that's it.
How many episodes is that?
Like 25, 26, something like that. Around there.
How many of them do we have to watch? How much filler is there?
There is no filler except for possibly the first episode.
I'm not watching the first episode.
No. That shit needs to stop.
We're
watching what we agree on. From start to finish. No 2.5 speed. No shortcuts. Nothing.
The reason I say the first episode is because the first episode is repeated again as episode 17, except you can now know what the characters, what the main character is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the first episode will feel like really out of place, and then it goes into a flashback for episode 2, and then it builds up back to like the first episode. So the only real thing you need to know about episode 1 is that the show eventually is going to introduce like science fiction elements into the story, because the flashback starts and it's extremely grounded and gritty, like this like mafia style like mobster storyline. And then it will slowly start to introduce some more sci-fi elements, and then the last stretch of the show will become more science fiction focused. And the first episode is intended to like show you up front, like, hey, this is going to be how the show will be in the final stretch, so that it makes it so that when that aspect of the show is introduced, it doesn't come out of nowhere. But again, you will see all of episode 1, the contents of it. You're going to see it anyways. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. You can skip it, and not a whole lot will be lost. So do it as you see fit.
I won't
personally,
skip it.
Personally, if you want to skip it, that's fine. If not, like, it's up to you. It's totally fine either way. The first episode will feel a bit jarring, though. I don't really think like the first episode really represents the show very well. Like, you might see the first episode and be like, what the fuck is this shit? And then you'll see episode 2, and it's like, it almost feels like it's not even the same show.
It's like, so it's like Berserk a bit.
There are actually a lot of comparisons you can make between Gungrave and Berserk.
Does Gungrave also take a 7-year break to just be on a fucking boat?
No, unlike Berserk, Gungrave is a complete story.
Oh, thank God.
There is no cliffhanger ending. There's no, like, we never made season. No. It's just the runtime that it is. It's a complete story. It finishes. It's done.
Okay. And what's it about? I guess I'll find out. This is already almost 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, just watch it. It's good. And for anybody who is listening to this, you can watch it too. So when the spoiler cast happens, you can enjoy the discussion.
You can be a part of the discussion.
Yes.
You can be on the show with us, and there'll be like 50 of us all talking over each other.
No, we're not doing that. We're not inviting anyone into the discussion.
That was the only
you
point
can talk
I was
about
making.
it in the comments.
That was the only point.
Maybe we'll invite something, but we will be inviting something, not me.
Oh.
Yeah.
maybe we'll have somebody, but we won't be. We will be doing it.
No, I mean, if I
Not
want to
you,
reach out to
Acer.
someone I know, I'm gonna ask you guys, but I want to do it. Not like,
yeah.
hey,
Sure.
everyone can come on the show.
So, anyways, I think that's it. I think
Who watches The
we're
Watchmen?
pretty much done.
We did,
Yes, and it was great.
and it was great.
Well, the comic book at least. The film not so much, but
You know what?
it was okay.
I love Zack Snyder movies just from like an aesthetical approval. Like I can
An
watch
Acer aesthetics point of view.
what? What? Like I can get past every stupid stuff in his stupid movies, just because I can appreciate like it's like
The Acer aesthetics.
what?
I couldn't
yeah.
appreciate Man of Steel. That shit looked ugly.
Yeah, that looks like shit. That's a bad movie.
Yeah, that movie is just like a slog.
Yeah. I want to talk.
Like, oh, let's just watch Superman be sad for 2 hours. No,
Hey,
thank you.
Daniel, end the episode. How about
Goodbye, everyone.
goodbye?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
What are we doing here, man?
The American dream.
American
what happened
dream.
to it?
Oh man.
It came true.